And I think now that we've had this enforced psychological winter upon us, we realize, wow, I really need to live more in tune with nature and to ride the cyclical waves of change.
Biz culture.
I think that anyone that has been to the underworld and spends time in the underworld of their psyche will recognize that so much of our growth and our potential can only exist in those really dark times, in those periods of suffering. And it's not to run from the suffering and not to actually then say, I've suffered and now demand reward as well from it, but just saying suffering is, again, a season of life, just as joy equally is, and not to devalue either of them, because they both just are.
And the fact that we should also not just simply try to escape it or think, that I want for it to be over as soon as possible. Actually, just not trying to escape, but actually live it and embrace it in a way. And at the moment, I feel, it's not only my opinion, but I think that a lot of people and small businesses, individuals, everyone, they kind of feel that this is, that this moment of suffering, that they have no idea what's happening and why they're enduring that. What would be your, I don't know, just short maybe inspiration or how, because this is what I was thinking, this how to embrace it, how to actually learn from that, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, our wisdom really is born of our suffering. We can't have one without the other. So if that's something that's of value to you, there's no other way other than through the direct experience to be able to access that. But I think it's the question, like, do I pass on my wisdom or my woe? Is this going to bring out, the best of me, or is this going to bring out the absolute worst of me? Is this going to be a challenge that terrifies me, or is it going to be one that actually inspires me? But I think this idea that you can have joy without suffering is, again, like what we were speaking to and what the myths teach us, that you can't have the summer without the winter, and the psychological winter is very, very necessary for the psychological summer also. So I think that how do we see more in the wholeness, that actually we always do have the shadow, and it's always kind of with us, but when it's almost integrated, it's almost like they're not two polar opposites. It's the one. We're back to that example of the tree. It's like all of me is able to be present. And the suffering almost is the thing that almost brings about the humbleness and the humility and the preciousness to know, like, the light will never fall this way again. I'll never be in this moment again. That within the suffering, it's not that everything's a lesson and it's all about being teachings and things like that, but when you can embrace your suffering and then you see the suffering in another's eyes, what you can do to hold that person just by, I've been there. I know that pain. Priceless. Just like what a gift of humanity that we can give it to others. So I think to be able to see it beyond one's own individual suffering, to know that they look to the myths and see how the gods and the goddesses have also suffered. But also just recognizing that suffering is part of the human condition. The more that we try to escape it, the more it'll lead to addictions, to other, behaviors which are not actually cognizant and recognizing that suffering is the human condition. And it's how I meet it. As I said, am I going to pass on my wisdom or my woe?
It's again, I think that you can relate again to that powerful thought when you said, there's no either or, there's an and in our life, and this is the whole point of understanding that there's no just joy and or bad things. No, it's and, the good and the bad, and they go.
Also remembering we've been through tough times before. This isn't the first time. Go back personally through your own personal biography. You will see you've overcome previously these dark moments. And who were you after? What was the expanded version of oneself? Because it's, again,
Biz culture.
COVID-19 is absolutely awful, and there have been blessings in it, the both and, not it's either good or bad. And I think that getting out of that binary and polarity and almost this, it's this but not that. You know, what we're actually, how do I say it? Imagine if I had, I'm going to do an example here. But imagine if this, oh, okay, it does have water, so I can't really tip it. This is trauma, right? And this is like the little kind of like saucepan. There's going to be a point where it overflows. And that's where we're at the moment. COVID, it's overflowing. It's like we're shattered. Our senses have been completely shattered. What's real? What can I rely on? You know, the fake news, conspiracy theories, like where do my senses, my physical senses are being shattered. But what do we do to be able to kind of contain the falling that's there? We actually have to get a bigger cup, a wider saucepan that can manage it. And then the only way that we can actually increase that saucepan to catch the volume, the deluge, the downpours that's actually coming, is through our capacity to create meaning. So, you know, the greater the capacity to create meaning from the experience, the greater the suffering we can hold, the more we can expand beyond it, and also then bring that expanded version of ourselves into an expanded universe.
Mm-hmm. I have a very nice question, the last question, unfortunately, today, but a question from George Sullivan, who is sending us very, I hope, nice and warm greetings from Malta. So the question, Kristina, is, do you think it's a blessing in disguise what is happening globally, as we have the opportunity to reboot our lives, as we have been overcome by too much materialism and lacking the essential empathy?
Yeah, great question. I think it asks us to reevaluate our role in the universe. We spoke about that on the podcast, which is, you know, not you or I individually bring the sun up and down, right? Mm-hmm. So we're significant and insignificant at the same time. And I think that there's, as we said, there's multi-causal factors to where we find ourselves today. So whether we want to see it through the ecological crisis, sociological kind of crisis, there's many streams that have, all roads lead to Rome, that have kind of led here. But what do we do now from it? And I think part of the issue is that what we have to, in a way, not have to in that sense, but tackle is the systemicness of many of our challenges. So whether it's systemic racism or the systemic disregard for the environment. And I think that, again, we don't actually heal in isolation, we heal in community. So I think that is, again, how do we actually collectively tackle the systemic factors at play in some of what we're almost facing at the moment is that like, what does it mean to be a human being? You know, and within that, then what does that mean in my relationship with the environment, with other people, with almost a sense of being able to say, how much do I live in the world behind my eyes and exist in the world externally? And if I'm so only in the external world where I only want power and status and kind of items, that's completely unsustainable. Like we were saying in the podcast, you know, there's not infinite resources on a finite planet. And I think that in ourselves, we're almost being asked to call to that kairos time, that vertical time, to be able to say, can I bring all of myself, most of myself into this present moment, into this present time, and ask what that next right thing for us actually is. But again, it's not just, we always talk about transformation must come from within. That's also true. But we have to realize that we're all fish singing and swimming in a soup. And if the soup is toxic, there's an element that is also our responsibility to deal with the collective systems that at the moment do not give full respect to the dignity of all life forms on this planet. Yes. When we're all fish in the same soup, but the soup is toxic, we have to think about that. Yeah, that's a very nice, again, idea that will stay in our minds for further reflection, and I think, you know, further searching and trying to answer the questions that we might have. Kristina, I'd like to thank you. I know that you have another meeting. I don't want to keep you, but it's such a pleasure, and I know that our listeners and viewers of on our Facebook wall we're really enjoying, and I hope that the questions that they had, they were answered, and they had pleasure. It was
more than pleasure to speak to you during our podcast, and of course now this very sunny and nice afternoon. Thank you for your inspiration, for your wonderfulness, if that's a word, but thank you for being so wonderful and kind to us, and I hope it's not our last talk. Thank you. And everyone who joined us today, I'd also like to say great thanks. I hope that you spent this afternoon very nicely and inspirationally. And just a short remark that you can follow us here on Facebook, you can follow us on Patreon and become our supporters. And believe me, we started with the first podcast, but we will definitely very shortly have more. And we hope that you will be listening to us and learning, inspiring, and all the other good things that might come from the podcast here. So thank you, everyone. I hope that you have a great Friday. Enjoy some outside, and talk to you very, very soon. Thank you, Kristina, again. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.